Welcome to a special World Retail Congress 2023 bonus episode of the Remarkable Retail Podcast, presented by Marketal. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
We are live together, Steve, above the Balearic Sea in the beautiful Arts Barcelona podcasting suite. Steve, what were your expectations coming here to Spain for the conference?
I didn't expect a kind of Spanish Inquisition.
No one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
A
little classic Monty Python.
I did, and I did not. I expected tapas, and I got tapas.
And plenty of delicious.
Plenty of delicious Spanish food,
Yeah.
and very low on the Inquisition part, thankfully. But no, I expected lots of great content, but I am very struck as we sit here trying to paint a picture because, it's the radio of the mind, or is that what we call that?
Yes.
Theater of the mind.
Theater of the mind. There we go.
I can see La Sagrada Familia, which is now in, I think, like its 100th year of being built.
Yep.
And the zoo and the sea, and so it's quite lovely here. So I did expect a lovely time. But no, the conference, I've been to the World Retail Congress one other time, actually, when it was in Madrid. That was 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I expected, which turned out to be true, is very senior level of participation. Mm-hmm. And so lots of senior leaders on stage and at the event. Mm-hmm. Very intimate setting and lots of great content and conversation.
And we'll get into a little more about the conference itself, just to kind of, again, the theater of the mind, paint the picture for the listeners about this event in case they haven't gone or they're curious. Let's start at the beginning where you and I started the event, just kind of pre-event. We did a store tour organized by the WRC. We saw some of the beautiful city on the way, and then we were hosted by a VIP at our first stop, Primark's Barcelona flagship store.
Yeah, I think this is the first time I've been on this kind of store tour where the CEO of the company was there, as well as I believe it was the area director, the country director, the store manager. So it was quite a VIP group of folks at the Primark flagship store in Barcelona in the Plaza de Catalunya. A really interesting store. I think it was 5 or 6 levels. I guess 5 levels of retail, and then we got to see the behind the scenes,
back office stuff. Yeah,
renovated building. So really interesting to learn much more about the company. Of course, we had Kevin Tulip, who runs the U.S. on the podcast before, so not unfamiliar with the company, but to hear the CEO and the rest of the team talk about it and get to see this beautiful building, one of the biggest stores, I guess, in the fleet, was quite interesting.
Let's get to the Congress itself. Now, again, we want to give the listeners a sense of what made the event worthwhile coming, because it's not a near close event. It's a bit of a hike to get here, for us at least. And what stood out overall from you from a conference event perspective? Like what when you walk away and think about the conference and describe it on the elevator, how would you describe it?
I think a few things. Well, first of all, for folks that have been to the NRF conference or Shop Talk, much smaller. I think 800 or 900 people. I don't know if you heard the final number. So much smaller. It's in a hotel. Yeah. So just the landscape that you have to cover makes it much more intimate.
And not a Vegas, Mandalay Bay size hotel. I was loving the fact I could get to the elevator in 30 seconds and get to the conference in like a minute and a half.
Right.
So,
I guess I would say kind of top of mind is, small, intimate, much more senior in terms of the mix of the attendees being CEO.
Special, not big, I think I might put in your vernacular.
Yes, exactly. Special, not big. And I guess because of the more intimate size, the themes, so they have these 3 themes: resilient retail, transformational retail, purposeful retail, which was mostly about sustainability. It was just kind of a little easier to focus, I guess, both on people as well as the material.
Yeah, what I observed about it, all those things, and a very senior level of participants, and they stuck around.
That was the other thing, right?
Right. So the president of Marks and Spencer and Primark. I mean, they were here the whole time. They were amongst the people. so to speak, where
Yes.
other conferences, NRF or Shop Talk, they come in, you see them on the stage, and they're whisked away, and you never see them again. Now they could be there, they could be in meetings, but you never really have a chance to kind of.
No, you're absolutely right, and I spoke Mindy Grossman, who we've had on the podcast. Not only did it was very easy to walk up to her. I mean, I know her a little bit, so it wasn't. She may have ignored me. She had not been on the podcast or met me before, but I kept running into her.
Yeah. She won an award. We should acknowledge her great career. She won an award here.
Kind of like a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Fantastic.
So, it was very, I did keep seeing the same people. It was very easy just to stroll on up and introduce yourself, not necessarily fight through the crowds or 40 people standing around trying to get their attention. So I really like that.
Yeah, I really love that. All right, now you were on stage yourself. Not
Correct.
only were we here and doing some podcasting, but you were on stage yourself. Now, it was a bit of a different... You were a bit of a different format, which was, as a keynote speaker myself, I'm not sure how I deal with it. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, there were two things that were different. I think the thing you're referring to is it was a quote unquote silent session.
Yeah.
So they ran two talks, I guess, simultaneously in the same room, and so all the participants were wearing headphones.
Right.
And we were far enough on the stage away from each other. The other session that was going on was a panel, not a talk. But
could you see the panel?
I could see, absolutely, I could see it. They were to the side.
Yeah.
And then and I could hear them a little bit. But yes, everybody was wearing headphones, not because it was being translated. I mean, I've done that a couple times before.
Just the silent room thing.
It was just the silence, so it was a bit odd. The other thing was that it was a 15-minute talk.
Yeah.
And so it was meant to be kind of a TED-style talk. And that
goes by.
Anybody who's seen me present before knows that that's challenging for me.
And did you do the Scott Galloway Tradecraft presentation where I have 35 slides? I'm going to skip a bunch of these slides. I love Scott's presentation.
I did not. I would say I had a little bit of issue of time management, but I guess what I would say about it. Well, first of all, just a quick mention of the content. So I took some of my own advice and decided to do a little experimentation. So I presented a bit of material from the book that I'm working on, which will be out next year. And so it was the first time I've been in front of an audience sharing any of that.
Taking it for a test drive?
Yes. And so in retrospect, I probably should have practiced a bit more. But I learned...
Well, what is it that you said in your book about Saturday Night Live?
Yeah, it doesn't. The show doesn't go on because it's ready. It goes on because it's 11:30. So in my case, I think it was 12:10. Yeah. And
now you said, and I commiserate with this, that one of the key indicators for, because it's a little hard. It's a silent room. You're trying to read the crowd, but I always look for that. It's one key moment. Is anybody doing a particular thing? And you mentioned on one slide they did.
Yeah, well, so I really presented two fundamental things, and then I'll answer your question directly. It was around, why transformations fail, and really the kind of key point is they fall short on ambition. They don't aim kind of high enough or make profound enough changes, and they fall short on pace. Companies don't transform at the speed of disruption, as I like to say. And so I had a graphic for that, and then I also talked about these 7 leadership mind shifts that people need to make, and I presented that as a build. And so people were watching it. And then when I got to the last slide and all 7 were up on the screen, like everybody's phone went up and took a picture of it.
Magic moment for a speaker.
So I hope that is a sign that I captured their imagination. And then I had a lot of people ask me for a copy of the slides, and I said, no.
Yeah.
It's
Read the book. Read the book.
It's a work in progress, and it may change. But yes, I don't want to have too much of this material out significantly in advance of the book coming out. But it was... It was a bit scary to do a trial run, but
well, taking your own advice, right? I mean, take a bigger risk and get out there and take it for a test run. Now, we were a gold media sponsor, we being the Remarkable Retail Podcast, of the event. So we hosted, we did our pop-up studio in and amongst the crowd. We hosted several thought leaders, starting with Sally from Spencer Stewart, 2 Martins, and a whim to be named later.
Yeah. Just so one of the things we wanted to do is focus on some of the speakers that would bring a different perspective. And so Sally Elliott, who runs retail and consumer search worldwide for Spencer Stewart, which is a pretty big job.
Yeah.
Really talking about leadership. So people get to hear that in a couple weeks, I guess. And Martin Newman, who's a customer centricity expert, joining us on the Rethink Retail Top 100 Influencer list. Martin Aruthia, who runs innovation for Lego.
I love that. I mean, I loved
Yeah.
all the conversations, but I was enthralled by Lego's approach, and just it really speaks to a lot of the work. That
Incredibly interesting. So we'll tease that as well. And then timing wise, we weren't able to get Wim Blau. He's from the Netherlands.
Yep.
Who is a senior guy at IKEA Group.
Yeah, Chief Digital Officer, I think.
Digital
but we did meet
Officer.
him. They were kind enough to bring him
Yes,
over. We couldn't fit him in, but he came over and said hi. He's
Right. So we'll record him in a few weeks, and that'll be on. So I thought it was really great conversations, getting some different perspectives in terms of content, in terms of what's been on the pod, but also much more from a European or global perspective.
We also missed Christina Rogers, who didn't make it over the ocean to the event, so we're going to grab her. She's the top EY global consumer thought leader, so we're going to get her on the pod at some point as well.
Yes.
All right, well, let's get to the main themes. Let's start there. You touched on what they set out to be, the main themes, but as you kind of sit here today on the Friday after the event, what jumps out at you as what you heard from the stage?
I think the two big things, again, like we talked about with Shop Talk, and I guess we've been touching on, artificial intelligence. That
was
there are a number of times various speakers coming back to that, how transformational it can be. I just mentioned briefly, speaking of E&Y, I had a side conversation, went to the E&Y suite that they had and got to see a demo of the way they're applying artificial intelligence. So that was super, super interesting to kind of see the applications and how you train these models and so forth. But AI came up quite a lot, more on sustainability here than I've seen at other conferences. Clearly that's something that comes up a lot, but I really felt, and I don't know that.
Do you think that's a European thing?
Well,
or
I was
a
just
senior
gonna-
leader, I was of two minds. Is that because we're in Europe, or is that because we're at a very senior level, and this is what occupies the minds of the top CEOs?
I don't know. I definitely have the sense that sustainability is taken more seriously in Europe than it is, at least in the United States. So I think that's part of it. But I think it's much more on the minds of CEOs. Just as, I guess the other thing, if I had to kind of do 2B, a lot about the importance of people in the business, the difficulty, labor challenges, those kind of things, motivating people post COVID. That was part of it.
You know what I thought? What struck me was if I compare this to our most recent Shop Talk, there was no mention from a historical or a learnings part about COVID. There was how do we act now? What changed because of the COVID era? But here I found there was a lot more discussion about how did you cope with COVID. So I think it's just I don't know how to characterize it. Maybe it's just that it's more not more thoughtful necessarily, but I thought they dwelled more on how did you get through COVID than the lessons from COVID sometimes. Did you get that sense?
Yeah, and I think maybe some of that is because there were so many CEOs on stage, and I think many of them reflected on how it was the most challenging period in their career, how they really felt a responsibility. To me, it was very optimistic from a standpoint of, we really got into the personal aspects, and I felt a responsibility that was hard to lay off people. And obviously it's hard to lay off people. That's not interesting, but I felt it was a little bit more of an emotional connection as opposed to, yes, we have to cut costs. That's difficult.
And the other thing that struck me is the layers of complexity. So when you're let's say you're a retail CEO operating in the U.S. or Canada or whatever, you've got a country and you've got regions to deal with. But many of the CEOs we talked to had 29 countries, 33 countries, 44 countries.
Yes, much more diverse than the typical American or Canadian company.
A lot more complexity as well with the different regions. The way they, we were talking to some folks from Indonesia, for goodness sakes, and they won the award for the longest it takes to anybody to get to here, 23 hours or something. It made me feel fine about my 8-hour flight. All right, well, let's jump into any sessions or people that jumped out at you that you wanted to make comments on.
Well, I think by far, in terms of my own personal impression as well as the buzz at the conference, Scott Galloway was the rock star. He was the main keynote.
Yeah.
And he also did a Q&A session, which 40 or 50 of us got to go to, so I got to hear him there. And it was, if anybody follows Scott, has listened to Scott, you're not going to be surprised.
It was vintage Scott.
It was vintage Scott, very provocative.
Yeah.
set the land speed record for saying the F word, I think.
I love what he said on stage. He said, all right, I'm very vulgar, so you'll have to get used
Yes,
to
he
it.
did. To be fair, he did warn people.
There's no surprise. You know what you're getting, even if you haven't listened to him. And shout out, by the way, to Scott, because we had a chance to chat with him in the lobby. Yeah. We talked for a bit, and he was very, very pivotal, so to speak, in our history of our podcast, because he's still the number one episode
still the
after
most listened to episode. So, but vintage Scott. You mentioned earlier, kind of rifling through the slides. I do, Scott. If you're listening, I don't mean any offense, but it does sort of bug me as I consider myself a professional speaker, though Scott certainly gets better and more high paid gigs than I do. But in any event, he had a lot of very provocative material. And if you listen to the podcast or get his newsletter, a lot of it you would have certainly heard before. But he does a great job, and I really think the other thing, both on stage, but maybe more so in the Q&A session, he really was taking on kind of the evil of social media and what it's doing to our kids. As well as kind of what governments need to do around sustainability. He basically said ESG at one level is BS. He said bullshit, but But and there was a lot of good back and forth on that. There was also a lot of good discussion about underrepresentation of females and people of color on boards and in getting venture capital and all that kind of stuff. So he's not shy about saying what can be said. And I had a conversation with a very senior person at a major consulting firm about it, and basically this person said that they loved Scott, and the other thing they said is, I wish I could say that.
What struck me about Scott's presentation also was, and he did focus on some retail content, knowing that there are a bunch of retailers, and he focused on the luxury segment. Yeah, and I think what took a lot of people by surprise was that LVMH passed the market value of Nike, and I think. There's a lot of slides that I saw. Again, the phones go up, and then a lot of people mentioning in the coffee chatter that that kind of layered on. So that was a great session. So what? I mean, there's so many great sessions. Very senior level. I was going to say,
I was going back through the agenda, and I was making a lot of notes, but it's not going to be a 2-hour episode. So I guess the other ones. One of the it was kind of a combo session. We mentioned Mindy Grossman earlier, and I just find her an amazing, fascinating person. So it was a fireside chat, kind of about everything that she had done, which is. Frankly, if you want to hear it, listen to our podcast.
Could have been half the conference, basically.
Yeah. Well, it could have been,
and of course, that's right. We have a bonus. We did a bonus episode.
Bonus episode with her, and so a lot of that we got into with her. But then she did kind of the tables were turned, and she did a fireside chat with a partner at the firm that she's now associated with, and a guy named Oscar Salazar. Who
went to school in Canada, by the way.
Gimmon McGill, I believe.
That's
Is that right?
Right.
Yes. And he's one of the founders of Uber, a tech guy. And I found him to be just incredibly interesting in terms of, it's very hard for me to, I can't possibly try to distill down all the knowledge that he dropped. But I felt that his ability to explain technology and its applications and what we should pay attention to was super, super fascinating. Like I was like, okay, I could be here for another couple hours with this guy. But then, there was everything from Stuart Manchin, who runs Marks and Spencer. Just his perspective on leadership was super interesting. We mentioned Wim Blau earlier, talking about innovation at IKEA. It covered such a wide landscape. I guess the last thing I'll say quickly, and then get your impressions is, and you kind of touched on this earlier, several of the leaders, like, for example, there was a top guy from Mango, just the breadth of and complexity of their operation, as you talked about, like really hearing that and how they deal with the balancing companies they or the stores they operate directly with franchisees, all the cultural differences, new technology. It's much more of a, I don't want to say more of a rich discussion, but in some ways much richer than, when you talk to a CEO that just operates in one country. Yeah.
Which is an impressive accomplishment. They got lots of stores, lots of people, lots of complexity, but just that, this pan-national idea. I went to, like you went to a bunch, I went to the Future of Retail session, which was quite good. I went to see Suzanne Long, who was our guest for a bonus episode. She's so impressive and equally impressive on the stage. She was with a couple of retail CEOs who operated in a bazillion countries. And here's what I thought was interesting. I want to get your impression on this. The lead for McKinsey opened up with about a 10-minute, here's our perspective. And he said, here's the 1 to 5 issues in grocery. Number 1 was affordability and inflation. And that's really, take the UK, who really did an own goal if you're a football fan. With Brexit, that came out from Scott, who lives in the UK. Everybody laughed at that. Not that phraseology, but they said 1 is this, 2 is this, e-com, and then 5 is people. And I was struck occasionally. And Matt Shea was broadcast in. He wasn't here in person, but he was on a panel to close out or close to the close with other associations from the UK. And it was funny because one of his first comments, he had 2 main themes. What's going on in the States? He had 2 main themes. One is shrink and crime for our retailers are out of control.
Yeah,
not out of control. That's the wrong thing. And he's Matt's been on the podcast as well, right, and from the NRF, and he said, listen, it's not a retail issue, because if it was a retail issue, we could solve it. Retail as an industry is pretty good at solving complex problems. It's a societal issue, which I thought was very insightful. And then secondly, people, he said, there's 800,000 jobs. We don't have enough people. And compare that against McKinsey, who says, well, it's number 5, almost an afterthought. So I'm like, Is it different here in Europe and other parts of the world than it is in North America? It's certainly the same in Canada. You can't find enough people. So that left me wondering and left me thinking,
Yeah, I guess I don't have enough experience to say how different it is in Europe versus North America versus Asia or whatever. But my general sense is that the shortage of labor issues, some of it's related to COVID, some of it's related to demographics, some of it's related to immigration, et cetera, et cetera. So
different demographics in Africa, for example. It's a younger country. It's
right. So I think there are some differences.
Sorry, not country.
Yes,
continent.
Wow, that's an own goal. So I don't know. I mean, at one level, the number of people that talked about, as I've heard my entire career, people are our most important assets. That's a very trite thing to say, but it's also true in a lot of respects. Yeah. And I think from a customer experience standpoint, if you can't staff the key jobs, even the number, this is a bit of a digression, but the number of retail stores that I see around the world where there's a line out the door, and it tends to be more luxury, but some of that is related to the shrink issue. It's a loss prevent. So
we saw that at the Chanel store.
Absolutely,
on the tour,
right.
For example.
And so I think there absolutely, in general, is a shortage of people, and it's not even. And sometimes the people you can get are not necessarily the best trained or the most experienced or whatever. So that impacts the customer experience. So it's hard to not see this shortage of labor and the difficulties retaining labor and training and all that kind of stuff as a major issue for just about every retailer. Yeah. So that was a bit mysterious.
Yeah. Certainly if we go all the way back to the beginning of our tour at Primark, they took us up to back of the house to just show us how and where they set up for the associates, and they're very associate focused and they're very focused on their people. So I don't know, it was almost like I wouldn't call it a paradox by any means, but it was interesting, and it just makes me think. Now, there's a bunch of other sessions, and I'm sure the content is going to come up on the pod as you and I talk over the course of the many episodes to follow. Just it's going to kind of percolate in there. Is there any other any other last comments before we sign off on this bonus episode?
I think what I would say as more of a theme, it's not a particular session. And it gets back a little bit to what you were saying in relationship to how folks talked about COVID. Felt like it was a pretty optimistic tone. Even though plenty of people alluded, just the labor shortage, there's inflation, there's labor shortage. People certainly pointed to...
Not without challenges.
And Ira Kalish, who we've had on the pod, he gave an update on his economic outlook. There's a lot of headwinds, or whatever you want to call them, a lot of bumps in the road that people are expecting. So it wasn't like people were dismissing that.
Yeah.
But I would say the tone, people were excited. There was a lot of optimism. So that was, I just enjoy hearing that, because sometimes you get a little bit, particularly if you listen to this podcast, you get a little bit too much doom and gloom.
Well, and just to end, kind of where we began, Scott Galloway was talking about that in his presentation. He said, like, the more you talk about it, the less it happens in my experience, because we've been talking about it. It's going to be next month for the last year.
Yeah, right. The recession is just around the corner. You know, right. The recession is going to start next month, and for 18 months.
Yeah. So anyway, listen, great event. Great to be here with you, my friend. Appreciate you. And we had some time to go walk around the city, and it was great. We'll be together again in July in New York City for the lead. Yes. We'll be on stage with our friend Simeon Siegel. But until then, safe travels on the way home. You're sticking around. We'll talk about that in the main pod. But for now, thanks again to our friends at Marketolf as our presenting sponsor, and enjoy. And I'd say, if you can, mark your calendar for the World Retail Congress 2024. I might be in Rome, but it's definitely a very worthwhile considering event to attend.
Yeah.
Amongst our weaponry are such diverse elements as fear, surprise, ruthless vigilance, and almost fanatical devotion to the Pope and nice red uniform. Oh, damn. I can't say it. You'll have to say it.
What?
You'll have to say the bit about our chief weapons.
I couldn't do that.